I walk around with a clicker and the mic while I talk. Sometimes I give a presentation like this where I spend a lot of time talking about sort of smart growth issues and kind of defining the question of what is smart growth. And when 1,000 Friends of Florida talks about that, what is it that we mean for a place to be a high-quality urban place? And I knew that following Kevin and Tim, there wasn't really going to be a lot of purpose in me spending a lot of time on that presentation. So I'm giving the really short version and really focusing on what we think identifies high-quality urban places. These are places that allow for mixed-use development. They focus on design that matches the needs of people and spatially reflects the size of people rather than the size of their automobiles. It focuses on historic preservation, providing great public spaces. So urbanism doesn't mean that it's all new, it's all shiny, it's all steel and glass, but that we do have green spaces in cities and we do reflect our historic character. And we focus on investing in efficient transit and needs of transportation that aren't just automobile focused. And what it really all comes down to is that so many problems that we experience in our modern daily lives are not separate, disparate problems. They're one integrated land use problem. From people dying in automobile crashes to obesity problems that come from an inability to walk, to environmental degradation like some we talked about this morning that's a consequence of development. These things are all integrated in part of one problem. They're symptoms of one problem rather than being disparate problems in large part. So my 3 tests for good urbanism are these. Right? Would you choose to walk? That's the first one. The second one, would you choose to walk? And then finally, would you choose to walk? And if the answer is yes, then I think it's a great urban place. And it's not a measure of how dense is it. It doesn't need to be a measure of any criteria. And I think this gets back to the qualitative or quantitative point that Tim made, is it really is this qualitative question of, is it a place that you would want to walk, and if so, then it's probably great urbanism. And so we can look at some examples. I would think that these all fall in the category. How many think these fall in the category of you would choose to walk? No hands. You guys are good learners, good students. These are all 3 of these are Florida communities. The one on the left is a new development that's in Gainesville, Florida. The top right is, would you believe it, right across the street from Florida State University in Tallahassee. Right, this is a gateway street into the city. There is a sidewalk, but you can see that there's a truck using it for a parking area. And then the bottom right is a typical Florida development where, in order to maximize the use of the lot, they've put front-loaded 2-car garages across the facade of every single house. But not the kinds of places that we would want to walk, and that contrasts with places like this, right, where we do preserve our history. It's an old federal building in Gainesville, Florida, on the top right. Where we integrate mixed uses and commercial storefronts. We focus on a really high-quality pedestrian environment, like Winter Park is done on the bottom right. We operate great transit systems that accommodate people walking and biking. It's a picture of the University of Florida campus on the bottom left. And then I think one of the great urban places in Florida is downtown Orlando in the top left picture. Right? We do have these large buildings, but they're interspersed with really high-quality public green spaces. So we can accomplish this. Lots of different ages, lots of different densities, but it does take investment and effort. So I want to transition now to talk about 2 ways that 1,000 Friends of Florida pursues policies that help make this a more feasible solution for more local governments across the state of Florida. First, I'm going to talk about our legislative advocacy, and then I'm going to talk about some litigation that we're involved in. So I'm going to mention bills that came up all during the last legislative session. The first one that I want to mention is a pair of bills that would limit how local governments operate community redevelopment agencies. So community redevelopment agencies are agencies that are typically started by cities, but counties can also start them in the state of Florida, that as tax values grow over time, they capture that revenue and focus it on redevelopment projects in a community, rather than just letting the regular municipal budget grow over time. And they're really powerful tools for getting reinvestment in downtown areas where development oftentimes is more expensive. If you're putting in a stormwater pipe in a suburban area, you can open up a trench and put that pipe in the ground. To do that same kind of work in an urban area might require getting maps that are 50 years old and try to figure out where pipes are. The records of what's underneath the ground might not be 100% adequate, and the street has to be closed for a few days while a hole is dug to replace piping. So it's a much different, it can be a much more expensive process for all kinds of reasons, and CRAs are really helpful in providing public funding to counteract some of that discrepancy. We saw legislation proposed last year that would have ended CRAs in the state of Florida and required special acts that the Florida legislature could create any new ones going forward. Unfortunately, that bill did not pass. Another tool that local governments use to keep public infrastructure provided concurrent with development is charging impact fees. And there was a bill proposed last year that would have prohibited local governments from charging impact fees for affordable housing. We're very strong supporters of affordable housing at 1,000 Friends of Florida, but don't think that it should come at the expense of providing the public services like the ones we talked about this morning to make sure that development treats its own stormwater, it processes its own wastewater, etc. And that's another bill that did not pass. And then finally, there was a gigantic omnibus growth management bill that did not pass. The most significant thing in it that I want to mention is it would have redefined areas outside of urban growth boundaries all over the state as appropriate for urban development. So counties like Martin County that have gone to the length of setting an urban services boundary or an urban growth boundary and saying we don't want to run public services outside of this area because of the cost, because we made a decision about the quality of growth that we want to have in our urban area versus what we have in our rural area. The legislature proposed to regulate those from Tallahassee instead and to get rid of many of them throughout the state. And I'm very proud. We put a lot of work in this at the very end of the session, and it did not pass. Those provisions, at least. The changes that are mentioned here related to developments of regional impact to become law. I'm going to skip the tree trimming and removal. And then the last thing that I want to touch on, a little bit of the statewide transportation policy also. There was another issue for a coastal connector parkway that was an FDOT initiative, but in addition to that, this last year, a legislator sponsored a bill that would have required a study to build a new Suncoast Parkway. And if you all aren't familiar with that, down in this part of the state, here's a map that shows it. Currently, coming north of Tampa is Suncoast Parkway. So this yellow line here is I-75. And coming north of Tampa is Suncoast Parkway, which if you need to go from Citrus County to Tampa is great because there's no traffic on this road at all. But if you're trying to repay the bonds that were used to finance the road construction, it is a problem because nobody's using the toll road at all. There was a proposal to connect it all the way up to the Gainesville and Ocala area here, which would open all of this area to urban development rather than putting making infrastructure investments in our existing cities. It would have created a great subsidy for suburban sprawl. And that bill did not pass, and then a subsequent push by FDOT to plan for the coastal connector also was not successful this last year. So here are some litigation points. One is we're working with a group of neighbors in Orange County to support the urban growth boundary there in Orange County on the eastern side of Orlando. If you're familiar with Orange County, the eastern half of the county between Orlando and Brevard is relatively sparsely developed. There's a lot of open land, and in particular, the Econ-Lockhatchee River runs north to south. That kind of creates a separating area between urban land around UCF and the rest of the county. And we've been working with neighbors there who have been litigating against some land use changes that would undo that urban growth boundary for the last several years. And we do this both through filing amicus briefs with the court and in this instance by providing pro bono expert testimony. We can help them reduce some of the costs of litigation by providing planning testimony and expertise. Another litigation we've been involved in, this is an administrative appeal to a comprehensive plan amendment in Escambia County. We no longer do developments of regional impact in Florida, if anybody's familiar with that term. When we do large-scale planning now, we use something called sector plans. And there was an instance of very first impression in Escambia County. It has one of the oldest, if not the oldest, sector plan in the state of Florida, where large landscape was planned at the same time, and certain parts of this large area were decided to be relatively intensely developed, and some were decided to be sparsely developed, under the idea that we should cluster development in this area and use the sector planning tool, not only as a tool to help a developer plan to build out an area, but also as a tool to help the public to decide what large areas should be conservation land in this area. and Escambia County decided to start peeling properties out of it. And of course, the property owners that wanted to get out of the sector plan were the ones that were designated for very low development potential. And we were not successful in that challenge, unfortunately. And then the last one that I want to talk about is it gets a little bit wonky, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible because I think this is one of the most important things happening in land use litigation in the state of Florida right now. That's still working. When the Growth Management Act was adopted in 1985, it did two really significant things that Florida wasn't doing before. It required compliance and consistency. And I like to think of these as the two pillars of our growth management system. And they sound like the same word, right? Compliance, consistency, they kind of mean the same thing. In the context of the Growth Management Act, each one means something really different. Compliance is the idea that a local government's comprehensive plan, like Martin County's comprehensive plan, has to meet certain minimum standards that are set by the legislature. And that was weakened, that requirement was weakened very significantly in the 2011 Growth Management Act, but it is still a rule on the books. The second requirement here, consistency, and actually this slide, this one's a little bit better. Consistency is instead of the idea that the comp plan has to be consistent with state law, it's the idea that every individual development decision by a local government has to be consistent with its comprehensive plan. So by using these two tools of compliance and consistency, we can see state policy for growth management filtering down at the local level. And that's the undergirding, or the two pillars of our growth management system. This consistency requirement has been significantly eroded by some Florida appellate courses in the last year and a half. The first one was Hine versus Lee, that said that yes, consistency is a requirement, but citizens can only sue to enforce consistency if the basis of their challenge is use density or intensity, meaning how intense a development is, what the use of the development is, or how dense the development is. What's missing from that is if you wanted to challenge a development approval because it violated an environmental standard in the comp plan, because it violated an urban design standard in the comp plan, because it didn't meet certain social standards that you've set in the comprehensive plan, you wouldn't be able to. And that decision became law really without a lot of attention from folks in the environmental and growth management community. But fortunately, right on its heels, the 3rd District granted an appeal of the decision in a case called Cruz versus Miami that followed Hine versus Lee to a T. And we were on the front end of that and have filed amicus briefs in support of the court there interpreting Florida's growth management rules to require consistency in all circumstances, like environmental, social, urban design, as well as use density and intensity. But this it has a potential to be a really significant erosion of the law if these cases continue as they are and become the law in every district. So that's it. Q&A. I'll give the mic back to Paul.
Okay, actually I found another mic, so we're good. So, questions? Hey.
I regularly get down to Miami and I see the marvelous implementation they've done putting high density around the metro rail stations. Frankly, I find it appalling. It doesn't look livable, it doesn't look walkable, and it doesn't look like any of the pretty places you're talking about. What did they do wrong? Or is that what is right?
Well, I think that's a good question. One size doesn't fit all when it comes to living. Okay, so I mean, what's good for one person may not be good or attractive to another. So I think, you know, when you look at the, I just was listening to a podcast the other day that was with George Perez from the Related Companies, who's been involved in a lot of the higher density condominium developments down there. It was interesting. I think the more important question is who's living in these places, okay? What he was saying is that, you know, many of the condos that have been built in Miami-Dade County are being occupied by people from South America. Now, see, so to me, I think we need to be looking at trying to build communities that are appealing and workable for our own residents as opposed to the people that are, you know, maybe coming from from Venezuela, and nothing wrong with that, but it's just what's happened down there. And so I think real estate developers they follow the path of least resistance. They build stuff and at whatever use and intensity, to some extent, many of them, to whatever they can get away with if they feel they can finance and market it, okay? So there has to be some checks and balances in that. But I would argue that, on the counter argument to that is that, for some people, what constitutes a great place to live is simply the fact that they can get from where they live to where they work fast, and they don't have to get into a car at all. So the argument is, if you're going to put density anywhere in South Florida, the highest density should be where there is transit. And there's only really one place in South Florida where there is frequent, convenient transit, and that's on the Metro Rail system in Miami. No place else. The buses come too slow. You have to wait out, in the sun and sweat. I literally, our office in Delray is within a half a mile walk, less than that, probably a quarter mile walk of a tri-rail station. And I've ridden it a few times, and by the time, if I do it in July or August or September or October, I'm so sweaty by the time I get to my office. It doesn't work.
There's a question about what looks to me the opposite about what you talk about in urbanism that I see at Dayland North, that I see at those places that are happening on Metro Rail. And those are not the Venezuelan condoites of downtown Miami. What might they have done better to have made those livable, walkable places?
I feel like it needs to be a better mix of types of housing would be number one. There needs to be perhaps, more green space if they can do it, okay, so that there are places that people can do. If you're just simply talking about the architecture, that's a matter of opinion. So are there things, I look at every development I've ever done and can think of 10 things I would have done differently. But maybe, some of the things that they've done down there aren't necessarily things that I would do. The architecture I don't always like. I don't like how they relate to the street. In many cases, I feel like wider sidewalks, around these things would have been way better. More landscaping, more street trees would make it more comfortable places. But that's there's always things that you can do better, and so there are a few of them.
I don't know specifically the development around the rail stations. I know I've seen pictures from going like Brightland's website, etc. But I do see this difference that blows my mind when I walk around downtown Miami. It isn't that often. I live in Gainesville. But maybe this story might help a little bit though, or just share my opinion on it. When I walk around downtown Miami, I'm very uncomfortable. The ground floor is a parking garage, and all I can see going up 8 floors is a parking garage. And that's not a nice place to be. If you're out on Biscayne Bay and you look back, it's gorgeous. It's these gleaming towers rising out of the water. If I go just south of the Miami River to Brickell, I think the intensity of development and the buildings from afar look exactly the same. But standing on the sidewalk, there's restaurants, there's bars, there's a Publix, there's a coffee shop, and it feels like those streets are two-way instead of one-way. So it's a much more pleasant place to be. And I think that those subtle differences in how you change the street front can do wonders to affect livability. And maybe those factors would influence making the development you're describing less quality. Without knowing the example, I don't know. But that makes the point that they are subtle distinctions. It's not just metrics like how tall it is or how dense it is that make it higher quality, in my opinion.
Let's see if we have another question. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I looked at the developments that you had mentioned on your first slide. I think your name spelled Hernandez.
Sorry.
I love the developments. They're certainly very attractive, very appealing. They were also very pricey. But in your speaking, you made reference to you couldn't tell the difference between workforce and, I don't know what your term was, market value or something?
Market rate.
So could you elaborate, or any of these projects, you heard this morning how elusive attainable housing is.
It is.
Do any of your projects consider that?
Absolutely. We've done a number of, we did in Delray, for example, the Atlantic Grove project on Atlantic that I showed you, we had 57 townhomes and 10 of those were workforce housing. So, and by the definition of workforce housing, we meant that those homes were affordable to people. They had to income qualify if they were making less than, in the case of that project, it was 100% of the median income. Okay, so it wasn't, so even if the market, I could sell those houses on the market for $350,000, I basically had to sell them for like $250,000. So that was literally $1 million of revenue that we forewent or foregone on that development to do that. In the case of Jupiter, the Osceola Woods in Jupiter, in Abacoa and Greenwich in Jupiter, two different projects. One, there was 146 townhomes. Another, there was 190 townhomes, when I mentioned. All those homes had to be, affordable to people making less than 120% of the median income, adjusted for household size in Palm Beach County. So, I mean, that
Was
is...
this imposed upon the developer? Was it imposed by the
Yes,
county?
those, in the case of the Delray project, we won an RFP, and we voluntarily agreed to do that, okay? In the case of the two projects in Jupiter, those were, that was a DRI requirement. There were certain, in Abacoa, there were certain parcels that had to do that. You know, and it was an opportunity for me, because we are a small company, we were able to be creative, figure out how to do it, and like a lot of the big builders couldn't figure out to do it, it's too much trouble for them, they passed it by. So we've done it, and those are 3 examples. I could have like 4 or 5 other examples. Any workforce housing that we've provided, I've received not 1 penny of governmental subsidy to do it. We've done it through design, by increasing density, and by negotiating with the sellers and telling them that, hey, you know, this is the only way the project's going to get approved. If you don't work with us on this, you're not going to sell your land.
And lastly, was that considered in the Stewart project at all? The Triangle project?
In the Triangle project, that's a rental project, okay? So we have a mix of homes from 1 to 3 bedrooms on that particular site. And there's no income restriction or workforce housing restriction on that, but you're going to have, you know, just by the nature of what you have, a rental project, you're going to have a much greater level of affordability than you typically would in a for sale project. So I think there's going to be some, I mean, look, on the 3rd floor, if you have a view of the marina or the river, we're going to charge you more. But on some of the other units, there's going to be a great opportunity to be able to provide, you know, rents that are, I would argue, below the market for anything comparable in the downtown. Now, there's not much comparable in the downtown, but hopefully that will change.
Okay, we're already over our deadline, but we're going to have a couple more quick questions, and then we'll move on to the next panel.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm Mike Meyer, City of Stewart Commissioner. I face a big challenge in my role and on the campaign trail, specifically for you, Mr. Hernandez. Thank you for working with us on this rule. I'm a redevelopment wonk. I've tried desperately to sell it to the constituency. There are a lot of people that are interested in it, but my major challenge is educating the public on how we're looking at quality of life, which means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For some of my vocal minority constituents, quality of life is Stewart 1972. No cars on the road, I've got a giant piece of property, you know everybody, there's no new people. So for me, quality of life is a future sustainable quality of life that is brought about by new urbanism and cluster development. So how do we better communicate with our constituents, with the average person, why this kind of development is especially important, not just for redevelopment's sake, but how does it address all these issues? And secondly, also as a commissioner, I'm always being threatened by people that developers are going to walk away if I make any question of them about how their development plans or PUDs are not squaring up with our comp plan. I'm like aggressively trying to enforce the comp plan and strengthen it. Are there other developers like you out there that are interested? And would you please just come?
No, I'm the only one, just so you know. but you know, like you're asking a really good question, and I feel like that, you know, I don't hire an attorney to come and represent me in front of the city commission. If anybody's ever been to my hearings, they know I stand up and I'll answer the question myself. And my attitude is, if I can't answer the question, okay, with my background in planning, then it was a good question. I better say, okay, let me figure out an answer to that question. And I think every public official here and every citizen should hold all developers to that standard. By the same token, okay, when I ask a city official a question and I say, you have this code out there that's going to result, there's no correlation between land development, there's a very little correlation between land development regulations and the ultimate quality of life. And if I can tell you why your code doesn't make sense, and why I can do a better development, if you give me a variance or a waiver or whatever, then you should also have an equally open mind and listen to that. And in terms of the participation and how to engage and educate, I'll let Thomas answer that one and Kev, because they have to do it every day.
I'm going to give you a couple of answers, Commissioner. One, I'm going to quote Mr. Hernandez. Something he said in Palm Beach was that we need brave elected officials who aren't afraid to only serve a single term. I'm not suggesting that it should be your outcome. It does take some bravery, right, for anybody who's an elected official to stand by their convictions. And I congratulate you on your win. You obviously did good communication on the campaign trail to be where you are to talk about those issues. And then the third thing that I would say is, I don't know that there's any trick to the communication other than that it be constant. And you point out that if people are going to move to Martin County, would we rather have more pressure on the urban services boundary? Would we want to reduce the lot size in the rural area to 1 per 5 or even less than that? Or do we want to accommodate them in downtown Stewart? And if you can make that, I think that's the case that can be made. And then talking about the positive aspects that come with a walkable urban community. I mean, folks, I know that was the lifestyle that I sought out. I wanted to be able to live in a house where I could walk to a store that would sell me coffee and to walk to a store that would sell me beer. Right? And that was the real estate that I wanted. You know, I don't need a pool with a waterfall. And you know, different consumers want different things.
I'll just add a little bit to that. I think my experience working all over the world is, as a government representative, as a staff member, is to be open and connected to the community, is to demonstrate that what you're proposing is of value, is of more value to the community than it is to the city or the county. It's of more value to their quality of life than it is to the developer's proposal to come in and do what they want to do. I think there's that balance and the tipping of that balance so the community becomes the ultimate owners of their community, their development pattern. And I think we've had some really good communication, you know, my time with the CRA, of being in communities that were initially very reluctant just to sit down and listen to new ideas. And it was the acceptance that we weren't going to bulldoze those opinions out of the way. They're going to be in place wherever they are. But I think if we deliver quality developments, if we show the citizens that we have listened, and within those quality developments, there is a responsibility to increase the housing stock. There's a responsibility to increase the environmental value of those developments. And there's a consistency of city-wide intention of doing a good job and taking care of people and encouraging people to live and work in the city.
Thanks. We have time for one last.
Let me add one thing to what Kev just said too. When I was in when I was in planning school, I read a book I'll never forget. It was called Gorillas in the Bureaucracy. Okay, planners out there may have read it. And what they basically said is that, the elected officials make the decisions, but the planners engage with the community and the developers on a daily basis. And you know what? When you go to the hearings and developers are often perceived as being just greedy, lowlifes. But the planners, okay, a lot of times the plan that's being presented is a result of months of collaboration with the staff. And sometimes you're giving up things that you really believe in just to get the staff to support you. But then you go to the hearing and the staff is silent or quiet, and they don't really, advocate on the behalf of the product that was created over time. And then that's how you end up with mediocrity. It really is.
Okay, this is going to be the last question for this panel. Those of you who didn't get to ask a question, it's another reason to stick around for the final panel at the end of the day, where there will be more opportunity for questions.
Hi, Laura Reynolds. Quick comment and then a question. My comment is based on the conversation that was happening, is that maybe we need to look at the H&T index, where you're looking at the transportation cost and the housing index. Somebody mentioned the workforce housing, and I think too often we use that as an excuse to build out in cheap land, but then people are stuck with really high transportation costs, so you need to look at both of those together in order to make good decisions on where to place people near transit. So that's my comment, and my question is, when do we start really looking at the consumptive use issue of water quantity? And has that come up in your work or as a developer or any of you comment on consumptive use issues?
I'll say this. What we look at a lot of times, and I think it's only a matter of time when the finance and mortgage industry start looking at it more closely, is the cost of ownership. Okay, whether it's water, whether it's energy. If you really care about the environment and you're really trying to do something to make a long-term difference, what Thousand Friends is talking about here, in all those areas, it costs the individual household and it costs society when we are developing inefficient patterns of land use. It's so obvious, okay? But yet, the American dream, I want a bigger house on a big lot, and it costs more to irrigate it, it costs more to run the water lines to it, okay, than if it was compact. So it's a process, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take, it took us decades, to get away from the way we historically had built cities, and now hopefully there's a great enlightenment that I've seen that's happened over the years. I'm sure you guys have seen it too, but we're a long way from getting there. But the kind of question that you just asked is a question that really ought to be thought about. And if people were saying, oh my God, when I told this developer he needs to cut 10 units out of his development, they thought, and you multiply that by 100 developments, in South Florida every year, 200, how many ever get approved? Think of what the long-term implications on water consumption are, and energy, and on taxes that we all pay per home. Think about that. We don't think about that.
I think it's been answered in a number of different ways that you could boil down to. It's the ultimate design of development. It's the design of development which will encourage a behaviour within the occupants of that development, and the facilities within that development alter the demands on the system, on the infrastructure, and also associating that with improvements in water reuse, in balancing the quality that we can get from the stormwater in the urban environment. And I think capturing that back, that's where we're capturing back some of the lost expenditure on building out the infrastructure in the first place.
Okay, well, thank you to the three panelists. And we're going to move right to our next panel, so if we could have Marcella, Aaron, and Gary join us up front now.